It's long been remarked that it's quite fitting that the symbol of faith in Christ is the cross, and not just for sort of the obvious or historical connections with the crucifixion, but also because just as a figure, as an image, as a symbol, it expresses in beautiful simplicity the idea of tension. The cross is the meeting point between two infinite lines. They converge at now a single point that has to bear up the weight of two infinite different realities that now intersect there. And tension is important in general as an idea when we practice the virtue of faith, because it keeps us from settling down too comfortably to think that we've accomplished our work, that we are completed, that we have arrived, and now there's nothing else to do but just sort of coast, allow inertia to take over from that point on. Because in this life, there is neither fully completion, fully arrival that are possible at all. And that restlessness should, at least hopefully, cast us into the arms of God out of exhaustion, if nothing else. Once we've exhausted all other opportunities, possibilities, we sort of simply entrust ourselves to God. And an example of tension is in the readings that we have for today. On the one hand, we have the unseen hidden power that raises up great trees, that causes abundant fruit to burst forth from tiny seeds. And it's not something that human beings do at all, something that we are passive in the face of, and yet, at the same time, the seeds are described as deliberately sown. The sprig is plucked deliberately from the top of the tree and planted in a particular place. The farmer is powerless in generating the crop, but he is needed to be involved for the preparation of it. And that's where the tension comes in as we apply this image to other aspects of our life. Because there's a temptation on the one hand to just pure passivity. And again, it can come from a very pious, a very holy, a very faithful background where we say, okay, well, God is the sovereign Lord of history. Things unspool according to his will. And thus, since there isn't anything that we can do to affect the situation, it doesn't matter what we do or if we do anything at all, since it will all just go according to his plan with or without us. And the other temptation is in the other direction. And again, it can come from a very pious, a very holy, a very faith-filled center, where we say, yes, God is Lord, but if there is no one to sow the seed, then there is nothing that will germinate and grow. There will be no harvest if there is no labor. And so in that, then, the whole weight of the project falls on our shoulders, and now we think that we have to earn our daily bread through the sweat of our brow, rather than, as Christ tells us, to go to the Father and ask for it. And there's no neat mathematical synthesis between these two opposed lines, and to reconcile them is a divine act, and so it is a mystery. But there is a synthesis in mystery found at the very point where these two infinities meet, at the point where the two lines become the cross. Because Christ, God and man, takes these two infinities and he takes the weight of them both on himself. He is the point of reconciliation. But it's not an end like for the tension, because we are baptized into the life and death of Christ. And so his cross is something that is shared with each and every one of us. It is our cross as well. And that's the real weight of faith and hope. Not just that we feel God emotionally, or that intellectually we think that the concept of God is reasonable or even true, but that we must live that tension of allowing God to be the one who works out history, while at the same time being a people who are called to join in the work. God as creator doesn't just sit out there and do it all himself, but he invites us to share in the work of creating. But that then also has the weight of substantially upping the risk for failure. Because yes, okay, there will be a harvest, that much is given, that much is promised, but there does remain the quite terrifying question of whether or not we will be a part of it. Because again, the Lord invites us to join with him. To borrow it again a little bit from Gordini, he says, we are accustomed to accepting the course of the Lord's life on earth as predetermined. Because it was as it was, we conclude that it was meant to be so. We judge everything by its outcome and forget how monstrous, in the eyes of both God and man, the means by which it was accomplished. We've entirely lost the Middle Ages reaction of horror at the thought of God's murder. We must strip ourselves of our customary callousness and realize how frightful the whole procedure was, how hardened men's hearts, how paltry Jesus' reception. Not until we have felt our way back to this attitude will we understand Christ's word, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. He knew that in the last analysis, mankind's unique, limitless possibility was not frustrated by human will alone. For this, humans, in spite of all their presumption and violence, are much too insignificant. It is incomprehensible that things could go as they did. After all, he was who he was. Why was none of those in power receptive and courageous? Why was no one there to lead the people to Christ? Why were his disciples, humanly speaking, so inadequate? Who is this God who seems to lack the power to bring about his Son's due reception? What a strangely disturbing impression of weakness he makes. And what wicked, dogged power is this thing called world that is capable of hardening itself against God's summons and cold-bloodedly making an end of his envoy? What kind of God must this be to remain silent before such things? We live so thoughtlessly that we no longer feel the impact of such unheard of conduct. How do men imagine the advent of divinity on earth? The myths suggest outpourings of divine radiance. Buddha is an ascetic, but he reigns in more than royal esteem. The sage Lao Tzu is venerated as a god. Muhammad gallops across the world at the head of victorious armies. Here, though, God himself becomes man. He has a divinely grave interest in Jesus' human existence. His own honor is at stake, his omnipotence. And what happens? The long history of the Old Testament has been painstakingly directed towards the coming of the Messiah, yet when he does come, this mysterious hardening of people's hearts, this inexplicable fate. What God is this that such things could happen to his Son? Surely now we begin to feel the otherness of Christianity. Those other so-called divinities were earthly powers, and earth recognizes and loves what is hers. When something truly from elsewhere comes, how different the response. Gradually, we sense what it must be to be a Christian, to be allegiance-bound to such a God in a world that is as it is. No wonder it means estrangement. And doesn't world in reality mean ourselves? Not only that which is about us, that in us, which is close to the divine, is somehow alien to us. And we have good grounds for the Christian fear that what happened once might be repeated in us. The second fall, the closing of our own hearts to God.